If we don't believe in God, how do we explain the universe, life, death, morality even? These questions sound innocent until you realize it's a trap. Rejecting God doesn't leave us empty. It frees us to seek real understanding, deepen our humanity, and build a more honest, intelligent, and compassionate world. So let's have the hard conversation. We're going to call out the pattern of intellectual shortcuts that these questions often represent. People claim certainty on what they have never studied. They appeal to God, authority, tradition, or the majority instead of evidence or understanding. This is not humility. It's avoidance dressed up as faith. As methodically as I can, we're going to unpack the question, the flaw, the real-world harm, and the beauty and impact of actually understanding. Let's start with the origin of the universe. The question is, how do you explain the universe? It sounds innocent, but it's often used as a rhetorical trap, a challenge meant to expose the supposed absurdity of not believing in a creator. In reality, it's not a question of explanation, it's a question of permission. How dare you admit you don't know instead of giving God the credit by default? Now, the flaw in this belief shortcut is most askers don't want an answer. They've rarely read cosmology. They conflate not knowing everything with knowing nothing. They substitute certainty for comprehension. It's not a quest for truth for them, it's a defense of tradition. This is a glaring misrepresentation of science. Science does not claim the universe came from nothing in the theological sense. Scientific nothing equals quantum vacuums, fluctuation fields, and unstable states within a broader physical frameworks, not absolute non-being. As far as we know, we have not found anything that meets the merit of being described as nothing. When people say that you believe that something came from nothing, they're ignoring their own theology. The fact that it literally makes the exact same claim that God came from nothing. This is the hypocrisy of divine self-creation. When you say God is eternal or God created himself, this is often accepted without burden of evidence. But saying the universe is self-contained is dismissed as irrational. This is a clear double standard. The supernatural claim is never expected to meet the intellectual rigor demanded of natural explanations. The person challenging your lack of belief assumes you need to replace God with an equally confident theory. But rejecting a bad explanation doesn't mean you have a complete one. It means you're honest about the gap. There are other common flaws to highlight here, such as the equivocation on nothing. Theistic arguments exploit emotional definitions of nothing that science doesn't use. This misrepresents both fields to score rhetorical points. There's also a false binary of God versus chaos, suggests either a God created the universe or it's all meaningless randomness. This ignores the complexity and richness of natural order arising from simple principles such as entropy, emergence, inflation theory, etc. This is also a fallacious appeal to ignorance. We don't know, therefore God is a textbook God of the gaps fallacy. Ignorance is not evidence. Now let's talk about the real world harm. If you think the question is answered, you actually stop asking. Whole generations ignore physics, astronomy, and philosophy because God did it satisfies them. When wonder is outsourced to faith, fewer people feel compelled to become scientists, thinkers, or problem solvers. Science denial becomes a virtue in some cultures. Religious epistemology then bleeds into public policy, climate denial, space funding cuts, etc. Our collective survival depends on a species-wide understanding of energy, planetary systems, and technology. If most of the planet is tuned out of the inquiry, we become an intellectually top-heavy species with a crumbling foundation. Now let's explore the beauty and the impact of actually understanding this. Admitting I don't know keeps minds open. Curiosity becomes a tool for building, not a threat to defend against. That type of intellectual honesty, curiosity, and openness can lead to all types of advancements in space exploration, clean energy, global communication, artificial intelligence, understanding time, consciousness, black holes, and so much more. We can finally get a better understanding about how humans interact with each other without appeals to superstition. Discovering that we're all made of stardust, realizing the universe operates with elegance, symmetry, and chaos, all without needing a puppeteer. We are robbing ourselves of social and cultural transformation. A society that values inquiry over certainty becomes more compassionate, less tribal, and more future-focused. We get to foster collaboration across cultures to solve global problems. Not knowing doesn't mean God did it. It means we're still learning. And that's what makes us human. Not our fear, but our pursuit. Let's tackle this next question. Where did we come from? This is the identity question. Deeply personal, often existential. But too often, it's answered with a story instead of a study, a myth instead of a model, a fable instead of fact. And when people ask this of non-believers, what they usually mean is, if you don't believe God made us, what else is there? Let's unpack the flaw in this belief shortcut. Number one, it's preferring comfort over complexity. Creation myths offer instant identity. You were made special, chosen, loved, intentional. But that comfort shortcut bypasses evidence, replacing it with ego. This unfortunately cultivates a habit of dismissing the evidence without engaging it. Evolution isn't rejected because it lacks evidence, it's rejected because it lacks emotional immediacy. Most who dismiss it haven't even studied it. That's why they say crazy stuff like, you believe man came from monkeys, don't you? They've absorbed objections from pulpits, not peer review. They are often pretending that simplicity is equal to superiority. God made man from mud is simpler than billions of years of branching adaptation. But simplicity isn't truth. Oversimplification becomes a virtue, and ignorance gets rebranded as faith. At that point, we're dealing with a willful misunderstanding of evolution. Framing revolution as random, aimless, or immoral is a deliberate tactic to discredit it. This misrepresentation allows believers to dismiss a rich scientific theory without engaging its substance. The belief shortcut elevates humans above all life, but understanding evolution shows our shared ancestry with all species, not a fall from grace, but a rise from complexity. The story of evolution doesn't make us less, it makes us kin. So let's hit the real world harm. The first one, science denial in education. Evolution is banned, downplayed, or distorted in curricula. Students are robbed of foundational knowledge about biology, medicine, and life itself. But there's also racial and cultural supremacy. Belief-based origin myths are often used to justify chosen people narratives. Evolution shows we're one species with common roots. Denying this props up tribalism and hierarchy, which leads to the dehumanization of others. If you believe humans are created in the image of a God, but only some humans reflect that image, you now have divine permission to exclude, enslave, or erase others. Another harm is reduced urgency for ecological responsibility. Belief systems that place humans above nature allow for exploitative thinking. If we were made to rule nature instead of being a part of it, destruction becomes destiny. There's also moral laziness. Instead of understanding the biological and social roots of behavior, people just label things sin, evil, or brokenness. Now let's deal with the impact of actually understanding. We get a deeper shared origin story. Evolution doesn't make us meaningless. It gives us a shared history with all living things. We are cousins of the stars, siblings of the trees, and descendants of survival. This gives us informed medicine and health. Understanding evolution helps fight disease, adapt treatments, and understand resistance. It's not just theory, it's life-saving insight. Perhaps one of the greatest benefits that could come out of getting a better understanding is greater empathy across species and cultures. If we all come from the same ancestral pool, nationalism and supremacy lose their teeth. There is no us versus them. There is only we. We can finally situate ourselves in intellectual humility and wonder. Our origin isn't a final answer. It's an open question with growing clarity. Wonder replaces worship. Curiosity becomes devotion. This allows us to reframe humanity as interconnected. Evolution tells us you are not above nature. You are nature. That's not diminishing. It's dignifying. We've traded our family tree for a fable, but our real origin story, it's deeper and more unifying than Genesis ever was. It's not about being chosen. It's about being connected. Let's hit this next question. What happens after we die? It's one of the oldest questions we've ever asked. And for many, religion offers a simple, soothing answer. Heaven or hell, paradise or punishment, reunion or regret. But the real question is, are we seeking truth or just comfort? Let's highlight the flaw in this belief shortcut. It prioritizes comfort over clarity. The afterlife is often believed not because it's demonstrated, but because the alternative hurts. Emotion drives the conclusion. It feels better, so we claim it's true. People don't believe in heaven because there's evidence. They believe in heaven because someone they love is gone. It halts the grieving process. By framing death as a temporary separation rather than a final goodbye, real grief is often delayed or suppressed. They're in a better place becomes a script that prevents people from sitting with the weight of loss and healing through it. This weaponizes death. Entire systems are built on controlling behavior through the fear of hell or the promise of heaven. People are coerced into belief, not by truth, but by trauma. This also replaces mystery with myth. Claiming certainty about the afterlife discourages exploration of what death means biologically, psychologically, and culturally. It pretends to resolve something none of us have actually solved, which means that this can be emotionally and ethically arbitrary. Afterlife systems often reward belief over behavior. The most moral, generous person may burn, while a last-minute believer gets eternal bliss. This undermines any moral framework based on justice, empathy, or consequence. So let's look at the real-world harm. There's the manipulation of the vulnerable. Deathbed conversions, fear-based religion, and childhood indoctrination thrive on afterlife anxiety. People surrender their autonomy and even their wealth to religious systems promising eternal reward. There's also the minimization of this life. When the afterlife is the real prize, this world becomes just a test. People accept suffering, injustice, and ecological destruction because this life isn't what matters. This adds the harm of delayed healing. Grievers are pressured to rejoice rather than mourn. Therapy, community care, and personal reflection are often sidelined by religious platitudes. There is even justification of harm. They'll get theirs in the next life is used to avoid accountability in this one. Abuse and injustice are tolerated under the guise of divine judgment or karma. This leads to another harm, psychological dependence. Many people become so attached to the idea of reunion or punishment that they fear thinking critically about death. The unknown becomes terrifying again unless it's dressed in certainty. But there is so much beauty and impact that can come from actually understanding. Embracing mortality enhances meaning. When we accept that life is finite, we live more intentionally. Love becomes more urgent. Time becomes more precious. Real grief leads to real healing. When we face loss head on, we begin to grow stronger, not in spite of death, but often because of it. The pain of grief carves out deeper spaces for empathy and purpose. Legacy becomes the real afterlife. What we do, build, and inspire in others becomes how we live on, not through magic, but through memory, impact, and contribution. Death unites all of us. There are no exceptions to death, no chosen, no cursed. That shared fate can be a foundation for deeper global empathy and connection. We can reframe values on the present. No more waiting for paradise. This world becomes the canvas. This life becomes the gift. You stop waiting to be saved and you start showing up. The afterlife lets us avoid mourning, but facing death honestly, that's where real love and legacy begin. Not by waiting for heaven, but by building something here that outlasts us. Let's jump into our next question. Why is there so much suffering? It's the question whispered at gravesides, screamed in hospitals, wept through trauma, and echoed in tragedy. Why would a good God let this happen? For the believer, the shortcut is ready. God's ways are higher than ours. It's all a part of his plan. It's a fallen world. But for the honest seeker, those answers explain nothing. They soothe the mind while silencing the heart. Let's unpack the flaw in this belief shortcut. It claims purpose without proof. Suffering is often seen as a discipline, test, or even punishment. This adds divine intent to pain, without evidence of any benevolent designer behind it. Blessed are you who are persecuted. God gives the toughest battles to his strongest soldiers. He'll never put more on you than you can bear. That's what religion often says about suffering. It absolves us from action. If God is in control, then pain is part of the plan. People accept oppression, disease, war, and inequality as preordained rather than problems to be solved. It demonizes the sufferer. Those in pain are often blamed. You're being tested. It's because of sin. You don't have enough faith. This spiritual gaslighting deepens the wound. It offers false certainty. The idea that everything happens for a reason implies a level of cosmic micromanagement that has no correlation to reality. It discourages investigation into real causes, biological, systemic, or chaotic. It's important for us to understand that hate is the mask that fear wears, and fear is the projection of ignorance. In a universe so vast and complex, it can feel crushing. Ignorance is natural, but it's still toxic. This is a devastatingly human truth. Suffering is not supernatural. It's the byproduct of not knowing how to care, not knowing how to share, and not knowing how to live without fear. Ignorance fuels injustice, and fear, left unchecked, mutates into hate. So let's dissect the real world harm. Fatalism becomes a virtue. People endure suffering they could resist because they think it's spiritual or deserved. Systemic injustice becomes sanctified. Oppression becomes God's will. Historical atrocities, slavery, colonization, genocide were justified by belief in divine authority. As we've seen repeatedly, this causes the dehumanization of the other. Suffering is seen as proof of divine disfavor. People in poverty or sickness are treated as less blessed, less chosen, less faithful. Such indoctrination leads to an emotional detachment from real pain. When you believe suffering is meant to be, you become less empathetic, less present, and less inclined to help, which leads to a genuine collapse of collective responsibility. The myth of divine purpose in suffering halts community progress. It replaces the question, how can we stop this, with what is God teaching us through this? So let's explore the beauty and impact of understanding. Suffering can be studied, reduced, and prevented. We gain tools, medical science, trauma-informed care, economic policy, and even conflict resolution. Knowledge turns chaos into opportunity. We learn that pain has causes. Entropy, biology, social design, these aren't mysteries from on high. Understanding removes the mystical fog and reveals clear leverage points for change. Empathy replaces judgment. Instead of viewing suffering as punishment, we respond with solidarity. We move from spiritual voyeurism to compassionate activism. We find meaning in action, not in myth. Meaning doesn't come from divine intention. It comes from what we choose to do in response. Some things do not happen for a reason, but we can give them reason by how we respond. We can stop expecting a plan and start building one. We stop waiting for God to fix what we now understand is our responsibility. We don't suffer because we're cursed. We suffer because we're conscious in a chaotic world. And the cure isn't in prayer, it's in progress. Suffering is the alarm bell of a species still learning how to live. So what's the underlying belief behind all of these questions? Unfortunately, it's a strong conviction, a certainty that we have the answers that they haven't even tried to get. Religion thrives on certainty, not because certainty is true, but because it's comforting. When people say God did it, it's all in God's hands, or everything happens for a reason, they aren't describing reality. They're protecting themselves from uncertainty. But what if not knowing is the most human, hopeful place we can be? The flaw in this belief is that certainty becomes a substitute for understanding. Claiming answers from revelation removes the need to study, question, or learn. It's an intellectual dead end disguised as insight. Pretending to know encourages arrogance. People defend answers they never investigated. They become gatekeepers of a truth without ever becoming students of reality. The most dangerous thing about pretending to know is that you stop becoming the kind of person who wants to know. Belief stops at the story. Myths are embraced not because they're true, but because they're easy to memorize and emotionally satisfying. But meaning isn't found in memorization. It's found in exploration. When you don't have that understanding, it creates fragile worldviews. When you pretend to know, you build your identity on shaky ground. Any contradiction becomes a threat. That's why some believers lash out, not because their beliefs are strong, but because they're brittle. So let's highlight the real world harm. Stagnant education and innovation. Why investigate when God did it is seen as enough? Entire cultures fall behind scientifically and technologically. There's a suppression of curiosity. Children are discouraged from asking hard questions. Inquiry is framed as rebellion instead of growth. Communities form around shared pretense, not shared pursuit. People echo each other's beliefs instead of challenging each other's assumptions. If you think you already know what's right because it's written down, you stop developing moral maturity. You mistake rules for wisdom. When you explain the world too quickly, you lose the magic of slowly, humbly discovering it. Now, the beauty of actually understanding these things is that real learning begins. I don't know becomes the beginning of every great insight. Every mystery becomes an invitation instead of a threat. We get the freedom to grow. Letting go of false certainty makes room for progress, evolution, and transformation. You don't have to defend the indefensible anymore. You get to become. We get community built on curiosity. Instead of competing over who has the truth, people collaborate to uncover it together. Shared wonder replaces shared dogma. We build for ourselves. Integrity of thought. You get to say, I believe this because I've wrestled with it, not because it was handed to you. Then wonder returns. The world becomes big again. Questions like, how did this begin? Or what's beyond this moment don't shut you down. They wake you up. Wonder isn't a weakness. It's the mind's way of connecting. When we stop pretending to know, we finally become people who can learn. We're not here to worship myths. We're here to build meaning, to do the hard work together as fellow travelers, not gods, not chosen, just curious, compassionate humans trying to do better by seeking to know better. I sincerely hope you enjoyed today's conversation. If you did, head on over to Windows Shop to download today's guide to continue on the discussion, whether in solo study or with the group. Also, if you've been on the fence about getting connected, what are you waiting for? You've been dating me this whole time. It's about time that you make me an honest man. So if you really want to get connected, take a look at the links in the description. There are plethoras of ways for you to get involved. You can financially support through Patreon or YouTube membership, also through PayPal or Cash App. You can become a regular shopper at Windows Shop, getting educational resources as well as some dope merch. You can join BC 101 and learn how we're trying to change the world by building local community. And you can join my email list at dldd.us to learn more about what I'm doing and what we're building through DLDD World Group, Bridge City Global, Windows Shop, Mastermind, Omniverse, and so much more. If you're ready to get off the sidelines and get in the game, stop dating your boy and go ahead and tap in. All right, that's all I have for you for now. I love you all with my whole heart, and until next time, keep rising.